Security for Internet Explorer 7. In this nugget, we're going to be addressing security for Internet Explorer 7. We'll start off by talking about add-on management, which is most often what gives you the whiz-bang features of the Internet, all the gloss and the flash and the fun stuff. We'll also be talking about protected mode. This is a new feature with IE7 and Windows Vista, which allows you to be more protected from malicious Internet applications. And then we'll also conclude with a brief discussion on what the various zones are within Internet Explorer. Have you ever been surprised by how much something costs? I bought my wife a car not too long ago. It's one of these little Mini Coopers. Perhaps you've seen them around. If you blink, you miss them because they're just really tiny little cars. But here it is in Death Valley. Yes, I absconded with it one time because it's a whole lot of fun to drive. So I drove it from Phoenix up to Las Vegas where I had a conference. At least that's what I told my wife. And then I decided to go on to Death Valley. And it's really a brutal environment for a little car like this, which is so low to the ground and everything. And you can see I got it pretty dirty here. But one other thing that's really surprising is how much these things cost. I mean, for the size of the thing, you'd be amazed at how expensive they can get. And of course, not wanting to hold anything back for my darling wife, I got it totally loaded. It's an S version. It's a turbo and all. And I got it up to 140 miles an hour on some back highway up there in northern Arizona. Well, in a similar fashion to how you can add additional options onto a car to make it more to your liking, you can also put additional add-ons into Internet Explorer. Now, a lot of times this will just happen because if you want to experience the best that the web has to offer, you're going to need to add certain add-ons that will provide a rich content for you. So, for example, I'm just going to quickly go off to the side here, and we're going to look at an example of installing an add-on. Here I'm looking at Adobe.com, where I've gone to their Flash Player where we can install this. Notice that you can install it with a Google toolbar or not. I'll opt out of that. And then, of course, I might have to agree to the Flash Player terms of service, but then I'll click on Install Now. Now, here's where we're probably going to see something that will look a lot like when you try to install some other kind of an add-on, whether it's an ActiveX item, which we'll talk about here a little bit later on, or whether it's some other kind of a feature-rich add-on for Internet Explorer. And what we see going on here is that we get this information bar notice. Now, I usually check that off so I don't see the message again. But this just identifies that the web page wanted to do something. Usually it could be something like a pop-up, or it could be some other kind of an item that it's trying to get consent from you for. And here it just says that it wants to install the Adobe Flash Player installer. Now, this is going to be an ActiveX installation, but there's a lot of other kinds of add-ons you can put on there. But anyway, I'll go ahead and click on this, and then I'll choose Install ActiveX Control. Now, having done that, I'm able to do this because I do have the administrator credentials. You do have to be a local administrator to be able to install these things in most cases. And so I'm able to go through the user account control and choose Continue here. Now, if the user does have permission to install something, and some of this can be controlled using policies, then they will get this message. And then they have to decide whether they want to install this item or not. And of course, we can then just go ahead and click on Install. You can also see there's some other options which kind of explain themselves if you want to pause the screen there for just a moment. But I'm just going to go ahead and just quickly click on Install here, and we'll see that it will then do just that. Then what we'll see here when it's done is we should see a kind of a completion movie up here, and this will give a good illustration of how it can kind of enrich the content of your web browsing, because you'll get a little bit more, well, I guess the name says it all, flash when you do all of this thing. Okay, well, I guess I got a network connection problem here with Adobe, but we'll just try it again and see what happens. I think there it goes. Okay, so apparently it did download the Flash Player okay this time. All right, so you can see how that gives a little bit more whiz bang there. Well, this is good, and certainly it's a lot more fun to surf the internet when you can get all those kinds of whiz bang features. But it can also give you some potential problems as well. What kind of problems could you get? Well, one of those things could be just compatibility issues or stability issues. We can kind of loop those in together because sometimes you really just don't know which one it is. Very often this will take place when you open up Internet Explorer and it just doesn't respond, and then it just says up in the toolbar. In fact, it'll say up right here, right next to whatever's at the side here. It'll say parentheses not responding, and then very often you just have to click the X to close everything up. And you'll get another prompt from Windows saying whether you want that it's going to go ahead and report the problem to Microsoft and so forth. But stability can be an issue with various add-ons. It just depends on who programmed the add-on, whether or not it's Billy Joe Jim Bob's add-on, or whether it's well designed. The other thing there could also be related to security. A lot of times malware, and this is the big point of what we're looking at here, a lot of times malware, spyware, all those other kinds of things could install themselves on your computer as an add-on, or at least they can get started as an add-on and then morph into something more dangerous. So then let me go, I think I got a window somewhere. There we go. Look at this person. This person is infected with all kinds of spyware, malware, who knows what. I mean, look at it. They've installed just about every toolbar that exists on the internet, apparently. And you can see down here at the bottom, they only have like an inch worth of browsing space. Apparently, the only thing they're able to do now is to meet sexy singles. Maybe it's not such a bad thing. But anyway, that's the only thing that's left to them. And we can see all different kinds of things that have been installed here. Now, here's a classic case of where the cobbler's children have no shoes. A time for true confessions. My kids, somehow or another, this is a couple of years ago, they were fiddling around with their computer up in the loft of our house, which is where I put their computer, and they got this Gorilla Guy on here. Now, I don't know if it's really malware or not, but I'll tell you this, it's nearly impossible to remove. What a mess that was. And that's the thing with a lot of spyware, malware, these kind of adware. It's very difficult to remove some of these things. For example, all these toolbars that this guy installed, a lot of them, you could uninstall them for now, but then they have ways of automatically reinstalling them the next time you launch your web browser. So it's very, very difficult to get rid of some of this stuff once it gets started. And of course, there's anti-spyware software and the like, but that's kind of for a different discussion. A lot of this stuff, however, does get installed by means of some kind of an add-on, and that's what we want to take a look at here, is how we can more tightly control the add-on installations. So as we get back to our security item here, I just want to point out that not all add-ons are bad. Some of them are security sensitive. So someone might be able to browse documents on your computer across the internet with certain add-ons that have been implemented, or it might open Pandora's box and allow other vulnerabilities to come in. So it is security sensitive, but there's also times when you need to have certain add-ons, either just to make the internet more fun, or maybe in your own corporation, for example. Maybe you've got a web page where it shows video of corporate officers giving various speeches and keynote addresses and things like that. And maybe the corporate president and so forth has insisted that any employee can view those websites at any time. Well, you might need to have some kind of a Internet Explorer add-on to enable video for those purposes. And I'm sure all your users are going to be flocking to that website, looking at all those speeches in their spare time. But anyway, you need to enable some of those things, and you also need to disable some of them. And let's first of all take a look at how to disable add-ons in an individual browser, and then we'll look at it in a little bit more corporate sense as we take a look at policies. Alright, so within a browser, and let me reopen that here real quick, if we wanted to disable a specific add-on, maybe we found out that an add-on was giving us a problem. What we could do is to go to Tools on our Internet Explorer web browser here. Then we would go down here to Manage Add-ons, and then choose Enable or Disable Add-ons, and we'd select that item. Maybe this shockwave flash object, maybe it would be giving me a problem. I really haven't had any issues with it, but just suppose, and if I did realize that it was giving me a problem, I'd just choose Enable after I'd selected it, and that would be pretty much it. And then if I were to go back to that shockwave flash web page, we would see that the content would not display the same anymore because I've disabled this add-on. Now, a lot of times, and I'll go ahead and click OK and restart the browser here, a lot of times when you do have a problem with the browser, it might not be security related. Again, it might be a compatibility issue as well. Notice that we do get a message here saying that we've got a add-on that's disabled, but it could be a compatibility issue, and I might need to disable it just for the time being to confirm that it's really giving me a problem. And if I see that the problem does repeat, might not be that add-on that's giving me the problem. So let me go back to my Flash site here, and we'll see if we can. You'll just see here that, of course, it's not going to be able to give me the kind of add-on. See here, it's requesting that add-on. Apparently, there would be some kind of whiz-bang thing going on right now if I had Flash enabled. So we see how that works. Now, of course, if you want to get it back, you just go back and do the reverse of what I just did, and we'll just choose to enable that instead. Notice, by the way, that as I click on this, as well as this one and whatever else I've got in here, none of these things will allow me to delete them. I can't seem to delete any of them. Well, why even have the button there if you can't delete any of them? Well, you can delete certain add-ons. The thing is, you cannot delete any add-ons that come with the browser by default. So, like this kind of thing comes with Internet Explorer by itself by default. The other things that you cannot delete are probably things that you can't delete because of the way that they were installed. So if you cannot delete them here, even though you're the one that installed it, you're the one that added it, then what you want to do is to go back to Add Remove Programs in Control Panel, and you've been there before, so I'm quickly going here, and you just choose Uninstall a Program here, and then you say, there's the Flash Player, I want to uninstall it, and then that's where we would be able to do that here. Oh, and also, let me get back to Control Panel here. If there's an add-on that's causing such a serious problem that it won't even allow you to open up the browser, then what you can do here is to go to this Network and Internet item within Control Panel, and then under Internet Options, notice that there's this Manage Browser Add-ons, and we'll just select that item, and we could then go to the ability to change that. By using this right in front of me. I couldn't find it for a minute, and there it was. Anyway, you see that it gives you the same exact dialog box, and you can manage them from that point. Hopefully then, once you've disabled one of the add-ons that you suspect is giving you a problem, then it will allow you to at least launch the browser from that point forward. Also note that maybe I need to just disable all add-ons. Maybe I've got a whole bunch of them that a user has put on there, and rather than pick and choose each individual one, I want to know if there's any add-on of any kind that's causing me a problem. And if that's the case, I'll disable all of them. And I can do that by going to my Start menu under Accessories and System Tools. And then once I'm down here, notice that there's this item, Internet Explorer, no add-ons. And then I can launch this, and then I can go to whichever web page I might be experiencing a problem with or something. And if the problem goes away, I know it's some add-on, and then I can decide to go ahead and go through and more particularly select or deselect different ones to disable. Also, if you prefer to use a command line, you can go to Start Run or a Search, or if you're already in a command prompt, you can do an IE Explorer -ext off. And that will do the same thing. And you can see that we've got that right here. Oh, one other thing I wanted to show you. I don't think this is an exam issue, but and I don't think I can show you on this computer. So, because this is a 32-bit operating system, and I want to show you a 64-bit issue. If I right-click on my computer, by the way, and choose Properties, then I can confirm that I am running a 32-bit version of Windows Vista. But I do have a connection to a server that's a Windows Server 2008 server. In fact, between the last video that I recorded and this one, I have upgraded from Windows Server 2003 to 2008. And what I want to show you here is the Internet Explorer here is also a 32-bit version of Internet Explorer. And anytime you click on anything on the Start menu to launch a web browser, whether it's in Windows Server 2008 64-bit edition or Vista 64-bit edition, it actually launches the 32-bit version, even though a 64-bit version is available. And why is that? It's mostly a compatibility issue because there are very few 32-bit components that will work in a 64-bit version of Internet Explorer. So Microsoft has just kind of defaulted to always using a 32-bit version of that. If you really want the 64-bit version, notice that on the Start menu there is one available, and you could just launch it from there, and maybe it'd give you some performance increase because it's 64-bit, but you would possibly, very likely, not be able to get all the whiz-bang features that a 32-bit browser using 32-bit controls would give you. Alright, then there are a number of other settings that we can address when it comes to configuring add-ons. And the one I want to talk about right now is something called opt-in. Okay, opt-in. Now, Microsoft's definition of opt-in is a little bit confusing. Let's talk about how most normal humans think of opt-in, first of all. Opt-in normally means that, yeah, I'll opt-in to go to lunch with you guys. Or I'll opt-in to get, the extra features on my car. Or I'll decide to do something. Normally this is a positive term or a forward-moving term. We're going to go ahead and decide to do something or to enable something, right? Well, Microsoft thinks kind of opposite of that. Let me show you what I mean. If I go back to my Internet Explorer browser and I go to Tools and then Internet Options, when it comes to the add-on for ActiveX controls, we can adjust those by going to the Security tab. Now, first of all, a little background here. Notice that we have a number of different zones. These are the 4 different zones that Microsoft sets up for us by default. There's the public internet, the local intranet, which is normally less secure, but that's okay usually because we're in a more safe environment there. Likewise, trusted sites would also be less secure because, again, we already trust those sites and we know that they have good ActiveX controls or plugins or whatever. And then there's restricted sites, which we don't want to have much of anything to do with. Okay. Notice that as I select through these things, that this slider bar will adjust to different levels based upon which one of those I'm in. Okay, and that's just kind of a one-size-fits-all to begin with, and then we can customize that further by going to the custom level that you see down here. Now, as it relates to the opt-in item, what we're going to do there is to address the ActiveX controls and plugins. Let me slide over a little here so you can see a little bit better. What Microsoft considers opt-in is the setting you see right up here at the top. This means that if I have a previously unused ActiveX control, that it will not run without a prompt. In other words, it will prompt me. So we'll disable this setting and will not allow it. Okay, now this is a little confusing. You probably have to pause and look at this yourself a little while because there's so many double and triple negatives in this thing. Okay, I'm going to disable, that's a negative. Unused, that's a negative. Without, that's a negative. So those are three negatives right there. Okay, so what's going to happen here? With this setting, an unused ActiveX control, previously unused ActiveX control, will not run. And even though it doesn't say it in the verbiage here, this is what we know as the opt-in setting. Okay, so it's a disabled opt-in setting. On the other hand, if I choose enable, that will allow a previously unused ActiveX control to run without a prompt. This means that opt-in is disabled. Okay? Yes, I've selected enable. I'm not cross-eyed here. I know what I'm looking at. I've selected enabled, but by doing so, I have disabled the opt-in setting. And that's just the way Microsoft talks or whatever. I don't know where they came up with that, but you will need to know that probably for the exam objectives. So just think upside down and backwards and you'll be thinking exactly the way Microsoft thinks. Now, as long as we're here also, I want to address some of these other options. We're not going to exhaust all of these because there's quite a few different things here, many of which are self-explanatory, but our biggest concern right now is ActiveX controls and plugins and the add-ons. Okay, so here this one says allow scriptlets. This is simply, a scriptlet is simply a script embedded within HTML code. It could be destructive, so obviously we see that it's disabled, but you see the other options here which explain themselves. There's also automatic prompting for ActiveX controls. And what this is really going to do is it's going to bypass that information bar that you see at the top of the browser, like when I installed the Flash control and I had to click on it. Well, instead of seeing that, it would just automatically go right to, do you want to install this item? If I were to choose enable there, okay? By its current setting, I do get the information bar instead. And then here I scroll down to where it says download signed ActiveX controls. What are signed ActiveX controls? Well, you can use a certificate infrastructure to sign different things. And you've probably heard of different certificate authorities, such as VeriSign and others. And you can have those internally where you've created your own certificates using a certificate authority on a Windows Server 2003 server, for example, or a Windows Server 2008 server. But you can also get them from third parties. But in terms of the internet, probably what you're going to see in terms of signed ActiveX controls are companies who have put together an ActiveX control and they sign it using a certificate infrastructure. This authenticates that it really is from the company that it says it's from. Now, this does not always mean that a signed ActiveX control is secure. It just means that whoever signed it's not trying to hide who they are or anything like that, like a lot of malware might do. It could still be from a company that has no qualms about unleashing all kinds of pop-ups or other annoyances on your computer or installing toolbars and so forth. So just because it's signed doesn't mean that you want to install it. But at least we will get a prompt here. And this is better than the alternative. In early versions of Internet Explorer, it used to be just enabled, which you can see here was not secure, and I even get a colored fill-in here as a warning sign, so to speak. But in early versions of Internet Explorer, it would just download any ActiveX control, any signed ActiveX control, and that's when people started getting real pop-up problems and toolbar problems. And then conversely, we also get this one, download unsigned ActiveX controls. This is disabled by default, and of course that's going to be the more secure method. Enable would obviously not be secure, and then you can also get prompt as well, which explain themselves. Obviously, it's if an unsigned ActiveX control, they are trying to conceal who they are. They don't want you to know what's going on, and they might try to be installing something on your computer surreptitiously. And then we have another setting here, initialize and script ActiveX controls, not marked as safe for scripting. Of course, that's disabled by default. Now, scripts are could be pretty damaging if they're malicious or if they're poorly written. So we definitely don't want to run things that are not marked as safe for scripting here, and that's the default behavior that we see. Can't really think of many reasons to enable this or even go to prompt with this, for example. The only time I could think of this as being an issue is if you have a developer that's running an ActiveX script an ActiveX item and they insist that you choose enable on this, then you might just have to if you need to get their ActiveX control to run, but that's probably just poor programming. Maybe if it's something that's in a beta or a test phase, you would have to do that. If you can't get around it any other way and you do have to choose enable for this, I would recommend that you move this out of the internet zone and just leave this at disable, and then instead, and this is a good time to show this anyway, then instead you go to trusted sites, go to sites, and then click add, and then just add in whatever the web address is of that particular developer's website. And then once you've gone into that, then you can go to custom level here, go back down to that same setting here, and it's down here, and then there it is. And then now you could choose enable for that item, okay? But that would only be for the trusted sites where you're well aware of who's written that script, who's worked with that ActiveX control, and so forth. And then just briefly, let's address these last two items here as well. This one is the Run ActiveX Controls and Plugins. That's chosen as Enable, and that's normally that's the default setting. This is just going to control whether or not the ActiveX controls can run at all, regardless of how any of the other settings are defined further on up the list here. And then the other thing here to look at is that if this setting is disabled, so if I go up here to this item, then none of the ActiveX controls and plugins can work at all, regardless, again, of how I've configured any of the rest of my settings here. And then again, this last item, Script ActiveX Controls marked safe for scripting, is enabled, and that again is the default behavior. You could disable that or prompt it, but again, the thing to keep in mind is, much like signed ActiveX Controls, just because someone signed it or just because someone says that it's safe doesn't necessarily mean that it is, so even though this is enabled, you want to proceed with caution. Now, there's some other things you need to know about ActiveX controls, and one of those things is, as I think I've mentioned before, you do have to be an administrator to install one of those ActiveX controls. Now, this is not practical in the corporation because you can't just go to thousands of users' systems and install the ActiveX control for them. So what we need to do is to find a way around that at certain places, especially if it's in a trusted zone anyway, and maybe if it's an ActiveX control that one of your own developers came up with. The way we'll do this is to bypass the need for an administrator to install certain ActiveX controls. Now, the way we're going to do that is go to Control Panel, so let's just get there. And then once we're in Control Panel, we can go to the Programs link, and then within Programs, we're going to go to Turn Windows Features On and Off. And that's right up here. Notice there's a shield there, so that means I need a user account control, and I'll click on Continue there. And then once we get there, we're going to look for the ActiveX Installer Service checkbox, and we'll select that item and then choose OK here. And you can see that there it is right there, so I'll select that item, and it's going to allow us to install the ActiveX Installer Service or use that service. Then the next thing we would need to do, and I'll just have to give this a moment to wake up to itself here, but the next thing I would do then is I'd have to go to the services. Now this again is something that could be controlled through group policy. We talked about group policies in a previous nugget, but for right now I'll right click on my computer and choose Manage, which again asks for user account control, and I'll do this while it's doing its thing here in the background. But within the computer management console, I want to go to the services and set the service to start up automatically, because by default it will not be set up that way. So I'll go to Services and Applications here, and then go down to Services, and I'm going to look for the ActiveX Installer Service. And let me go to the standard view so it's a little bit easier to see. And what I'm looking for here is the ActiveX Installer Service. But there it is. I got to scroll up just a little bit there. The ActiveX Installer Service, I'll just double click on that. We'll go to Automatic, and then I'll just go ahead and start the service. Okay, and then from henceforth, anytime this computer is restarted, it'll automatically start that service for us, and that'll pretty much be that. Now, the thing to keep in mind, though, is that that's not all I need to do in order to allow my ActiveX controls to install automatically, because I don't want to give blanket approval to all ActiveX controls. I just want to give that approval to certain ActiveX controls that I know about and that I trust. And what I can do there is to go to Group Policy Object Editor. You can, again, do this in a domain or an OU's group policy object. I'm just gone to the local computer policy here to show it to you. And you go to this Computer Configuration, Administrative Templates, Windows Components, an ActiveX Installer Service. Here we have a single item. We double click on it, and we'll see that what we can do then here is to enable this policy, and then we'll click on Show, and then you just simply click on Add. Now I'll add in the web address of the place where I trust my my items. So maybe it'd be HTTP : whack whack, and then it'd be ActiveX, whatever it is, .cbtnuggets.com or something like that, and then it'll enter in some values here like 1, 2, 0, 0. Thanks, James. What does that mean? How do I know that's not 1,000? How do I know I don't enter in 50? Whatever. Well, I'll just click OK here for the time being and point out that it is in this help right here. But the different values will give you different determinations on how it behaves. So then here I've created a PDF document called ActiveX Installer Service Values up on nuggetlab.com for you, which explains all of those different values. Now the one I put up there was, in our example, was 1, 2, but regardless, whatever's in the first position relates to this first name right here, okay? So this would be a value of 2, okay? So that would mean that if it's a trusted ActiveX control, it will automatically install. What's the next value? A 1. That would mean that if it's a signed ActiveX control, that it will prompt the user for installation. And then a 0 here in the third one would mean that if it's an unsigned ActiveX control, it'll block it. And then a 0 here relates to these server certificate policy values, meaning that if there's an installation certificate error, it'll just abort the installation if there is a certificate error. So if I had a really liberal policy that I wanted to implement here so that my users would have ActiveX controls that just plain installed, then I would set up a value of 2, and then 2, and then I could do, a 1 here because you cannot automatically install unsigned ActiveX controls, but I could do 2, 2, 1 as a very liberal policy here. And then remember again that only is going to apply to the group policy that I created, where I also specify the actual URL of that ActiveX control that I want the users to install. This does not apply to any ActiveX control they stumble across, only the ones that I specified in that policy. Alright, let's go ahead and talk here also about something called protected mode. Now what this does is it prevents something from escalating like it might have in previous versions of Internet Explorer. So for example, if a user goes to a web page that has some malicious content, then if that content is able to trick that user into allowing something to install or to run, then it will do so underneath that user's privileges. So if the user has access to their documents, of course they do, then whatever this application is will also have access to their documents, meaning that it could be something like spyware or something that would snoop into your documents, or if you're an administrator, then it might install itself as an application, which normally only administrators can do, and then you're really in trouble because it could install viruses or all different other kinds of malware, which you wouldn't want to happen. Well, now what happens with protected mode is it allows those little applets or those little applications to run to some small degree, but it does prevent malicious infection the way we've seen in the past. What it does is it allows those activities to run in a little sandbox. This is a virtualized registry and or file location so that maybe the application thinks that it's running in, program files or the Windows system directory or HKey local machine or one of those kind of protected locations, when in reality it's redirected to what we call a mandatory integrity control location. And most internet functions happen in the low mandatory integrity function, so they basically can't do anything. And as a result, they can't therefore install additional software, for example, maybe a toolbar or something like that, or access your documents, or install keystroke loggers to find out your password, or any of those kinds of things. By the way, you should also know that protected mode only works with Internet Explorer 7 that comes with Windows Vista. You can't just put IE7 on XP and expect to get protected mode, because Vista already has within it certain things critical to protected mode's function, such as mandatory integrity control, which is part of what gives us this sandbox function that I mentioned earlier. Oh, by the way, let's take a look. This is not part of an exam issue, but you might be interested to know, where does all this sandbox data go? I mean, those applications or those little applets or whatever that we find on the internet, they're writing data somewhere, so where is that? Well, if you change directories to %local app data %, then you'll see I've gone to my own local profile here, the app data directory, and then local. And then from within that, I can change directories to, for example, if I go to the temporary internet files cache, this is where applications that I find on the internet are going to try to install themselves. So I do a CD, and then I would go to, Microsoft. And I'm just pressing tab to automatically fill the rest of this in. Windows, temporary internet files. and then I do a dir, and I don't really have much there because I haven't installed much here or used the internet that much. But there's a couple of directories there, for example, and whatever those items are, they at one time were doing something on the internet where they were performing a function, and if they were applications, then they wouldn't install themselves in program files or something like that. They would just have to play within that little sandbox. Now, they could break out of the protected mode if I wanted them to. In order to be able to allow them to break out of protected mode, you'll get a prompt. So, for example, here's a photographer friend of mine. He's a photographer in this area, does lots of weddings and things like that. Really good photographer, and we chat a lot because I'm an avid photographer myself. But if I wanted to go ahead and contact him, maybe I couldn't remember his email address, I'd go to contact here, and then I would go to his email right here where it says, right there. When I click on that, what's happening is, remember, this is involving temporary internet files, and it's been working in the sandbox. But as soon as I try to access something and break out of protected mode, like opening up Windows Mail to email this guy, then it will prompt me like this, and we see that it's yellow. Anytime it's yellow at the top there, that means even normal users will be able to respond to this and allow it. You don't have to be an administrator. If it had red, then in that case I would have to be an administrator to be able to do that. But that's just an example of how protected mode works. Now, I don't think you're going to really have any problems with protected mode, but if by chance you do, maybe you're working with a really old application or some application, internet application that is not able to function properly with it, then you can go back to your web browser, go to Tools and Internet Options, to return to the Security tab, and remember we had this Enable Protected Mode item right here. All you'd have to do is to deselect that checkbox, and that would no longer enable protected mode for you. Now, finally, let's talk a little bit more about the zones that we addressed a little bit earlier. I guess I should have just left this browser open, but as we go back to our Internet options, notice that on the Security tab we have these different zones. Internet meaning just that, the public Internet, and these all have default settings here for security purposes. Local Internet, see, default settings, trusted sites, restricted sites, and so forth. If I adjust any of these, maybe I make my Internet accidentally, I make it just medium instead of medium high, then I can reset to the default level if I need to. Or if I adjust any of these, then I can reset all the zones back to their default level here as well. The buttons only become exposed once I've made any changes. Now, for the Internet, these settings are pretty good by default. I can also make adjustments for my local intranet here as well. So, for example, by default, it's going to automatically detect intranet network sites, and it does that based on things such as the subnet that I'm on, or if I'm on a private IP address. For example, I'm on a 10.10.10 IP address. Well, that's not even a usable address range on the internet, so it knows that that's going to be on my local intranet. You could include UNC paths, and you can see other things that you can custom select there if you want to. Then for our trusted sites, what we can also do is to add additional sites there that would not normally appear under local intranet, but that we do trust and we want to loosen up security on a little bit. For example, maybe I work with a vendor out there that we've been collaborating on with some kind of a ActiveX control or a web control that we both know is safe and protected. Well, they appear on the internet, so it might give a security level there that would not be acceptable and would not allow that application to run. So I would have to maybe go to the trusted sites here, and then I would go to sites by using this button, and then I would add in whatever the name of that website was. So it might be something like, HTTP, and you see it gives a little bit of history here as well. And I could go whack, vendor, .activex.com or something like that. Just whatever it happens to be is what you type in there. Now also, this will require HTTPS by using this checkbox, but I click on Add, and it would then allow me, anytime I go to that particular website, to be able to access those particular web applets or whatever they are under the medium security instead of the internet security, which would have been medium high. And then, of course, there's restricted sites. Maybe we get mad at that vendor and we decide we don't like them anymore. Well, what we could do here then is we could enter in the same location here, and once we click on Add, then that would now be a highly secure site, so that basically not much at all that can go on with it. So this gives you an overall idea of what these various types of sites or what these zones are capable of doing for you. In this nugget, we talked about security for Internet Explorer 7, where we started off by talking about add-on management. Remember, add-ons are those things that can be installed within Windows Internet Explorer, and that can add more whiz-bang features to the Internet for you. Pretty fun, but could also be potentially pretty destructive. Another thing we took a look at here was protected mode, which is where web applications will operate. This is the low mandatory integrity control, so that if a web app is malicious or poorly written, then it's going to only do what it does in a very low integrity control, and it won't be able to hijack your system or access files that it shouldn't be able to. And then we also took a look at the various zones, because remember, you have different levels of trust based upon where that website is, and you can add sites to the trusted zone, for example, if it's a known good site with good web applications. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.